I mean, what's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Do you not understand that they are that way because you're Joe Flacco?
You just like to discredit things that people deserve credit for.
That you can't possibly be expected to defend that.
Talk about the game, Sam.
So,
who cares about what people think about us?
Yeah, I like football season, all the things that go with
it. Welcome in to the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo here with Sam Monson. How you doing, Sam?
Doing good, Steve. How about you?
Great. Do you have your audio going, by the way, just to make sure?
I have, in fact, pressed record, so we should have two decent streams, and this time we figured out what the echo was. So, again, in theory, this should be the best audio we've had since we've been forced into our work-from-home setup.
Yeah,
but I've said that each time.
Keep promising the people.
This.
Yeah,
right.
Keep promising the people. See what happens. Why don't you under-promise this time? It's going to be terrible if you're listening.
Okay, the
now,
audio
you're listening
will
right
sound
now,
like we're both communicating via tin cans and a string. So anything above that is a bonus. You're welcome.
All right, today, all sorts of fun on hand. We're going to do a little bit of what we did leading up to free agency, going team by team, talking about some of the stuff that they've done and some of the things that they still need to do as far as draft needs go, holes to fill as we head completely into a draft season. Still some free agents out there, so those will be trickling in, but it was a much quieter week, Sam. So let's go through the AFC today. Sound good?
Yep, let's do it. What order are you going to go in,
All
Steve? Right. Is it the same random order they popped into your brain the last time, or have you actually got a sequence in mind this time?
That was a good order based off of divisions, and then it was random within the division. Here's the order. We're going to go to PFF.com and use the offseason needs for all 32 NFL teams article, which is alphabetical across the entire NFL. So we're going to go alphabetical through the AFC.
Okay.
Sound good?
All right.
So that kicks things off with the Baltimore Ravens. We highlighted some of the needs that they still have, including outside and inside linebacker in their scheme, outside backer being more of the Matthew Judon edge rusher, trying to find a complement to him. Interior offensive line now that Marshall Yanda has retired, and then some more wide receiver depth. What are your thoughts on the Ravens, some of the stuff they've already done, and some of these holes still to fill?
Yeah, I mean, I like a lot of the moves they've already made. Linebacker is a need, particularly inside, but I think that's the most sort of attainable position in today's defenses, particularly a team like Ravens, who have been working on this positionless defense where everybody moves around. They scheme up blitz pressure, they scheme up coverage really well on the back end. So if anybody doesn't need linebackers, it's kind of this defense. At least from an off-the-ball inside linebacker point of view. But the interior of the offensive line suddenly becomes an issue with the retirement of Marshall Yanda. So I think that's where you focus initially.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on the linebacker deal. I mean, the way they use Chuck Clark in and around the line of scrimmage, the way they use Earl Thomas, I mean, they are one of those teams that are turning safeties really into linebackers. So the actual linebacker depth chart of LJ Fort, Ataro Alaka, Chris Board. I mean, there's just no names there. Plus, Josh and Patrick Onwuasor. How's that? Both of those guys as free agents. So, I mean, they still need to replace some of the linebackers there. There's a lot of mock drafts that are giving them Kenneth Murray from Oklahoma, Patrick Queen from LSU, two guys that are projected to go in the late first round. That's where the Ravens are. So. I don't know if it's going to be a position that they truly attack, though, because of and here's another guy. Hi, buddy. All right, we'll go ask Mommy for those Cheerios. So I don't know if it's really a position that they attack in the first round. There is some good guard value in the second round. Jonah Jackson's our top guy from Ohio State. Netane Muti, how about him? Sam. I saw you got him in playing around with those mock drafts from Fresno State. He would be a perfect fit from Fresno to the Ravens.
Yeah, that's the guy I really like because the Ravens are running this sort of power-based offense. I got my own little distraction in the background as well. Although she's just bailed with her iPad to go do whatever. They are a team that embraces this whole power run game, with what they're doing with Lamar Jackson, with the sort of power run based scheme. Marshall Yanda was a player who was not scheme specific. Marshall Yanda could play in any scheme, could do anything you want him to, is one of the best offensive linemen of his generation, this generation. So him leaving does open up a significant hole on that offensive line. But I think Muti would fill that specific role in this offense right now. If down the line they transition away from that and go to, different types of offense, maybe he becomes a player that's expendable. But for right now, I think he's a perfect fit.
Yeah, Ravens had the number 2 offensive line by PFF rankings last year. Lose Yanda, so definitely have someone to replace there. But yeah, overall, I mentioned on the other podcast, really like what the Ravens have done, bringing in Calais Campbell, probably overpaid for Michael Brockers, but you made the point too, replacing a Michael Pierce, who really couldn't get after the quarterback. Brockers is a little bit better rushing the passer, and there's some multi-gap versatility with Brockers, with Calais Campbell, and again, with everybody on the Ravens defense. Really love what they've done there. I still think cornerback is a place that they need to go. Just to keep the pipeline going, because Marlon Humphrey's going to have to get paid really soon. Marcus Peters, keep those guys going. That would be my suggestion in Baltimore.
Right, and you got to move on or replace what you had in Jimmy Smith. Jimmy Smith, I think, is a guy that, whether he was coming back or not, is someone that they could potentially have looked to get younger and cheaper at. So, cornerback, because you need so many of them in today's NFL, is never a position where you're set. You kind of like the idea that you should draft a quarterback every single year because the value is so high. Cornerback, I think for a different reason, you should do the same thing. You should be drafting a corner every single year because you need like 4 or 5 of them on your depth chart. So keep swinging, because you're never going to be able to keep 4 or 5 quality ones at any given time. The turnover is too high, whether it's paying them, whether it's them getting old and retiring. You need to keep replacing that.
And the same thing with quarterback, the payout doesn't necessarily match, what you have to give up for it. The payout is so strong when you actually hit. So it's almost worth finding that one corner, even if it takes you 3 shots at it, you know what I mean? Because it is so valuable. So, again, working our way through the AFC, let's go to the Buffalo Bills, another team. That's right, Bills fans. We like a lot of what you guys have done this offseason. We've talked quite a bit about their receivers, what they've done there. I wrote an article about all of the top supporting casts for the last 2 years of first-round quarterbacks. I ranked Josh Allen and the Bills number 1, the best supporting cast out of all of the last couple year first-round quarterbacks because of their receiving options, because they've crept back toward average on the offensive line. As far as needs, we wrote down we're looking at more edge defender depth, some youth at that position, a little bit more O-line depth, something they've done a nice job at that could still get a little bit better, and then yet another pass-catching option, because I think even at tight end, Dawson Knox, he flashed, some skills there, but I also don't think you can have too many playmakers or even a big-bodied wide receiver option to go with some of the smaller guys that they have over there. What are your thoughts on the Bills?
Yeah, I think they put themselves in a really nice position with the moves they have made, because now we're talking about basically depth, right? They've reached the point where they filled all of the glaring needs on the team, and they're heading into the draft just basically needing to upgrade where they find value or to get improved depth where they don't have it. And that's a great spot to be in. That's the purpose of free agency in the period of team building before drafts, is to patch up all the massive problems and leave yourself being able to pick the best player available every time your draft spot comes up. So yeah, I think pass rush again is another situation where you can never really have too many players, and they don't have that many guys that are young enough that can be significant factors. So I think pass rush is definitely a spot. And yeah, I think the rest of it is depth, and that's that's a great bit of team building to this point.
The problem with pass rushers, so they obviously don't have a first round pick because of the trade for Stephon Diggs. If we're talking about pass rushers that could be there in the second round, Julian Okwara, he might be a little undersized for what they want. The Notre Dame really explosive edge defender. Kayvon Chason should be going in the first round, even though he's number 46 on our board. If you went by our board value, Chason would be a good player and a good fit there. He's got some Jerry Hughes type of qualities to him, but I don't think he'll be there at that point. Darrell Taylor from Tennessee could be a guy to keep an eye on. Interesting what the Bills have done with their defensive line, though. Ed Oliver, they drafted first round last year. Star Lotulelei is there. And then they just brought in Quentin Jefferson and Vernon Butler. They are deep now on the defensive interior, still have Harrison Phillips. They might have Jefferson play more that like strong side defensive end type of position, and they did bring in Mario Addison as well, but they've already brought in a ton of depth there. I don't know if they're going to spend high draft picks on the D line, but I still don't have a ton of confidence in their pass rush beyond Hughes. Addison's been a little up and down over these last couple of years.
Yeah, agreed. And it's interesting. There's a lot of undersized pass rushers in this draft. And Jerry Hughes is kind of an undersized pass rusher that's always been a productive edge rusher despite his size. So I don't know if the Bills necessarily like that type of player, but they have one that's been very successful for them over the past few years. So this draft, I think, is stocked full of these that are kind of relatively slight, relatively undersized, but have been either productive or have spectacular athleticism. And I wonder if the Bills would try and snag one of them in the mid rounds.
It's funny because it is Panthers North, and I feel like when I was doing mock drafts for the last 3 or 4 years with the Panthers, it was always like they've got great veteran depth on the D line. They need to get younger, and they've essentially built the same thing up there with Brandon Beane coming from Carolina. They've built, other than Ed Oliver, they've built all veterans on that defensive line. So yeah, I think overall the Bills are in really good shape, right? Solid across the O-line, outstanding receivers. I think they've really put themselves, Stephon Diggs will be their first round pick, obviously, but they've put themselves in good position to grab the best players on the board. We always advocate drafting corners. Josh Norman's only on a 1-year deal. Get younger at edge. If you find a stud offensive lineman in the second round, go for it. Or if you find that big-bodied receiver, I think the Bills are in really good shape to hit any one of those particular needs, whichever way they might fall. So, good job by the Bills so far. Big year for them. Likely the favorite in the AFC East. Now we go to our hometown Cincinnati Bengals. This was a clear need. A quarterback like Joe Burrow, well written, Mr. Ben Lindsay. The Bengals have done, I think, a sneaky good job of at least adding talent to their team. I don't love every single contract that they've handed out, but they just added Von Bell, a safety from the Saints yesterday. They've added a lot to their secondary and some decent moves by them in free agency.
We take a second and just appreciate the idea that the Bills are favorite for the AFC East. Just let that sink in across the landscape for a second. How insane is that? But that's the situation we're going to be dealing with. They better hope that it's not a Cleveland Browns repeat, because like the Browns were favorites for the AFC North for the first time in forever, and look how that worked out. But yeah, they really are. So Bengals, yeah, they've spent in free agency for the first time in a long time, and not just sort of brought in a player. They've spent consistently. Like they've gone after and brought a lot of players in and address some needs. And obviously the Bengals had a lot of needs given how high they're picking in the draft. It's no secret that the biggest need is quarterback, and Andy Dalton is available because they're expecting the draft one. Where do you think they are? Are they completely dialed in on Joe Burrow, or is there any chance whatsoever that they are interested in A, moving off the number 1 pick and drafting Tua, or B, simply taking Tua number 1?
I don't think they're in the take Tua market. I think any team sitting at 1, even if maybe not if Peyton Manning's sitting there, but if you're sitting at 1, you'd be stupid not to at least hear offers. A team like the Dolphins that has so many first-round picks, or the Jags, or whoever it is. I mean, you'd be stupid to not listen to an offer that was like 3 firsts and 2 seconds or something like that. And then you weigh the options. I could have Joe Burrow, or I can have Tua plus 4 other extremely valuable picks. So I mean, you should at least listen to those offers if they're ridiculous, right? If somebody wants to dial in on Burrow that much. But I think ultimately that's where the Bengals. The way the Bengals draft is they basically say, here's the player, a player that we would take at 1. If that player is a guy that we would normally take at this position and he's there, we'll take him, right? And they don't look for these offers to trade down or move around the draft board. If they're comfortable taking a player at their spot, they'll take him. And I think ultimately that's where it's going to land. They're comfortable taking Joe Burrow at 1, and he'll be the guy. And they were bad last year, but part of that was injuries and other other things that came about. This could be a competitive team, I think, this year, based off some of the moves they've made, some of the guys they're getting back between AJ Green, Jonah Williams. What do you think about the Bengals being much improved in 2020?
I think there's a good chance they could be. The offensive line still massively concerns me, but that's kind of dependent on how good the quarterback is, right? Assuming it's Joe Burrow. If he's really, really good, he can immediately change the dynamic of how that offensive line looks. Plus, obviously, Jonah Williams coming in and fixing what the most important spot in theory right away. It could be a lot better, but that offensive line, just from an on-paper standpoint, still is pretty concerning. The Burrow thing is interesting, or the whether you listen to offers, because I think it all starts with your evaluation of those 2 quarterbacks. Like, if you believe that Joe Burrow is fantastic and Tua is significantly further below, I don't think you even listen to the offers. I think there's nothing that should move you off that spot. To me, you take the guy that you think can be a franchise-changing player, and you don't screw around with it. If you think they're pretty close, then you start listening to conversations and figuring out how absurd the offer needs to be before you're willing to take the lower percentage chance that you've nailed it with that draft pick. So I think it kind of depends where they are in those 2 guys. It just seems that the stars have aligned too much in terms of, relatively local kid coming home, his incredible season a year ago, even though it was basically 1 year. I think it just makes too much sense for them to take him number 1 and never look back.
Yeah, I think your point's a valid one as far as how close are they. I mean, I think you would have to run the numbers on what that would look like, and then there's other factors as well. But yeah, I think the Bengals creeping back toward average as a roster, still question marks on the offensive line, and the annual question about linebacker. I wouldn't attack linebacker too high in the draft. I think what they do on the turn is really interesting. If they could get, I mentioned on the other podcast, Josh Jones, the left tackle out of Houston. If you can get him top of the 2nd round, and you've got Burrow and then a tackle for the 2nd year in a row, near the top of the draft, I'd feel much better. Not that he's a slam dunk or anything like that, but you have to start throwing some resources again at that offensive line and getting it back on track. So, maybe get a Josh Jones, maybe get a guard later in the draft and try to rebuild there. But I like, and then with all the veterans that they've added to the defense, adding some youth and playmakers there as well, another option.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. So the first pick is going to go on Joe Burrow. I think their 2nd round pick at the top of the 2nd round should absolutely be on the offensive line somewhere. I think that's their biggest glaring need outside of that, particularly because I think the next need for them, to me, is also wide receiver, right? Because you got AJ Green back on 1 year. He may not even last the whole year if you think you can trade him on. And this is a great receiver draft. So you can hold fire until like the 3rd round potentially on wide receivers and still get a quality player that you don't have to spend that 1st or 2nd pick on a wideout and still get a quality player. So, I think definitely target offensive line at the top of the 2nd. I think then start looking at which of those wide receivers starts to slip to the point where they're available when you're picking in the mid rounds, because you can get a guy that will impact this team right away from day one, along with Tyler Boyd, along with AJ Green, help out Joe Burrow and not have to spend a giant amount of money to make it happen. So, candidates that might slip into those mid rounds, guys like Michael Pittman Jr. from USC, who's, a bigger body guy, but it's got some route running savvy to him. He's got good hands. He's got pretty good playmaking ability all around, to be honest, particularly for a guy of that size. He's the kind of guy that could be available in the mid rounds and be an immediate starter for that team.
That would be great. Fans do this all the time, and I detest it, which is just go round by round and say, get this position here, this position there, this position there. But the way we're doing it is more based off. No, the way you did it was fine, because we're doing it based off of how the draft board might fall. It doesn't mean I have to go get a tackle here no matter what. I have to go get a receiver here no matter what. We're just looking at guys that potentially could be there at each spot. And if they came away with Joe Burrow, Josh Jones, and Michael Pittman, say, I think you're looking at a pretty nice top of the draft for the Bengals. All right, Cleveland Browns next up in the AFC. Again, in the preview show, I thought a perfect scenario was them to get a veteran left tackle like a Jason Peters and then draft one. They went a different veteran route. They paid a ton of money for Jack Conklin at right tackle. Should be a good upgrade. I mean, it's an upgrade at right tackle. Mm-hmm. We know they paid a ton of money for Austin Hooper. The left tackle position is still out there. And as far as predicting what a team's going to do in the draft, I don't know if this is the easiest prediction in the draft, that the Browns are going to take a left tackle at number 10 overall, but it has to be who they're targeting, especially since there's 4 names sitting atop that have top 10 potential. Browns' biggest need, certainly left tackle right now.
Yeah, it is. And it's unfortunate for them because I don't know if rookie left tackles have the best success rate in the NFL in terms of hitting the ground running year one and being productive players. I think the Browns could potentially or should potentially prepare for the idea that whoever they take is, I don't want to say a liability year one, but it's not helping the situation in year one. I still think that they would be in a fantastic situation if they did sign a Jason Peters to a 1-year deal, let whoever they draft at the top of the first round sit there for a year and learn, kind of like the way the Eagles did a season ago with Andre Dillard, and be the guy that helps in year 2 and beyond. But they're probably not going to do that by the way they've done things so far. So they're going to be basically picking their favorite left tackle at that spot, whether it's an Andrew Thomas from Georgia, whether it's Tristan Wirfs with the insane keg thighs and the absurd jumping ability and speed and combine numbers. They're basically just going to be picking their favorite that they've evaluated the best and is available, and hoping that guy can plug in and solve their left tackle problem. And again, put all the focus on Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, Andrew Thomas is my guy there from Georgia. I think he'd be the best fit for many teams up there. He's the top tackle on our draft board. So I think the key there, though, Sam, is they don't need the left tackle to be special right when he comes in, because they added Conklin and at least got the right tackle position better. Joel Bitonio's at left guard, J.C. Tretter at center, and Conklin at right tackle. Those are above-average players at each spot. Still a question at right guard with Wyatt Teller, who I still hold out hope for, and a question mark at left tackle. When we talk about getting back to the mid-tier, creeping back toward average offensive line-wise, I think they've already done it. As long as the left tackle's not Julian Davenport or early career George Fant, or a guy that's going to be a 75 pressure guy, I think they're in much better shape as far as the offensive line goes. And then, when you draft a guy, it's also for the long term as well. So I think that's where they're ultimately going to go. What about the rest of the roster? Losing Joe Schobert at linebacker, you've got some question marks there. Mac Wilson he didn't play great last year after having that really hyped up preseason where he made some nice plays. I like a little bit of what they did at safety, bringing in Carl Joseph, low risk, seeing if you could get more out of him than the Raiders did. Andrew Sendejo. I mean, their secondary could be shaping up to be pretty solid, but I think more depth all across the back 7 is another place that they can go in the draft.
Yeah, I think depth generally across defense is where they could go. Obviously, they could stand to upgrade, and B, prepare to get cheaper from Olivier Vernon. He didn't have the kind of impact we thought he might have a season ago. but he wasn't the only one. I think they'll probably run with those young linebackers and see what they can do. The combination of Mac Wilson, of Sione Takitaki. And then in the secondary, I think a huge amount rests on what Greedy Williams looks like in year 2. Because, he was a player that we really liked coming out, didn't love the schematic fit that he ended up in. I think if he rounds into the kind of player that we thought he could be, that secondary is in really good shape. If he struggles again in year 2, now that secondary corner spot is a major problem that they need to fix, this time a year from now. Or you could preempt that by taking another swing in the draft and potentially giving Greedy Williams some competition or a backup option if and when he struggles during the season.
The way the draft is, they're positioned well to either attack that cornerback position again, or what do you think about receiver? If you have Odell Beckham, you have Jarvis Landry, the wide receiver 3 is a question mark. They're sitting there with the 9th overall pick in round 2, and then they have 2 third-rounders, 10th overall and 33rd overall. I think receivers and corners are going to be solid in that 2nd and 3rd round range. I think could be the way to go for the Browns, especially if they go tackle at 10 overall. But wide receiver 3, something they should be looking at?
I think generally they should be, again, hedging their bets a little bit with this receiver group. I mean, we talked before about maybe you would think about moving on from one of those guys, whether it was trading Odell Beckham to the Patriots for 23 overall, whether it's, I think the personalities, the collection of those personalities still concerns me. I think they potentially got better at being able to handle it with the change in head coach. But I know those guys, Jarvis Landry, Odell Beckham, they were teammates at LSU. In theory, it should work perfectly harmoniously, but that was before they were both millionaires. 2, it didn't involve Baker Mayfield, who was his own strong personality being thrown into the equation. And 3, it now needs to come together quickly and everybody function in the same direction. Alternatively, you could think about breaking that whole thing up. And, I think Jarvis Landry in particular, I think there's too much upside and talent in Odell Beckham to be completely writing him off. So let's start thinking about how you could upgrade on Jarvis Landry, and a guy like KJ Hill from Ohio State would be really fascinating. I think he is sort of pigeonholed as a slot receiver at the next level, but another guy that crushed the Senior Bowl all week long, at least when it comes to route running, right? He dropped a couple of passes, so his grade wasn't as good as some of these other guys. But in terms of route running and getting open in the one-on-one drills, nobody could cover KJ Hill all week long. So I think Hill could come in right away, compete with Jarvis Landry for those slot snaps, become their third receiver when they do run 11 personnel, and then in the future, give you a reason to move on from Jarvis Landry and, A, get cheaper at the position, and B, remove one of those dominant personalities from the group and try and streamline the whole thing.
I like it. Some options for the Cleveland Browns. Let's moving our way through the entire AFC, but let's take a little break, Sam, to tell you about our friends over at Manscaped. If you're listening to this podcast right now, look down. Remember, when was the last time you shaved your junk, Sam? When was it?
It's been a while, Steve.
It's been a while. It's been a while. Don't lie. Take a second to thank our sponsor, Manscaped, for holding you accountable to get rid of the funk and shave your junk. It's beautiful outside, but you're not allowed to go out there. So stay home. Get your Manscaped Perfect Package 3.0 because it's pretty awesome. Manscaped is the only men's brand dedicated to below-the-waist grooming and hygiene. It's forever changing the grooming game with the Perfect Package 3.0 Essentials Kit, which comes with the Lawnmower 3.0, Sam, a step up from the 2.0.
Many steps up, Steve. Many steps up. They have cranked the RPMs up, and that's obviously the most important thing. There's also a light. There's a light involved, so you can see what the hell you're doing. It's cordless. It's splash proof. I think not like fully waterproof, right? Splash proof.
Yeah.
Thing it does the job, Steve. Gets the job done.
So very well done. So you also get the Crop Preserver, anti-chafing ball deodorant and moisturizer. When you purchase the Perfect Package 3.0, you get the biggest bang for your buck. You'll also get the blade refill, replacement blade. Every 3 months it comes through, plus the Shed travel bag that Sam loves, the Manscaped boxer briefs. It's all a part of the Perfect Package 3.0. You get 20% off plus free shipping with the promo code PFF at manscaped.com. Do yourself a favor and always use the right tools for the job. Get 20% off plus free shipping with the code PFF at manscaped.com. It's 20% off, free shipping, promo codes PFF. Your body, your partner, and your balls will all thank you. All right, getting back to AFC.
Somebody was looking for recommendations for that stuff on Twitter yesterday. I sent them along to manscaped.com, use the promo code PFF, and happy camper.
They were looking for manscaping recommendations?
Yes.
Hi, Scout. Yeah, so, I mean, there's only really one recommendation. It's the one with the name, manscaped.com. Denver Broncos is where we're going next. We put for their top priority speed at number 2 wide receiver, secondary needs of O-line and cornerback. Broncos, a lot of turnover this year. Drew Lock is at quarterback. Love the concept of speed at wide receiver. I love Henry Ruggs for every team, but of all the teams, is Henry Ruggs the best fit for Denver opposite Cortland Sutton?
Yeah, I mean, the speed thing is nice, but I think generally they just need another receiver, right? Cortland Sutton obviously emerged as one of the superstars of last season, made some spectacular plays despite less than ideal quarterback play for a lot of it, but they don't really have a secondary guy anymore. They traded away Emmanuel Sanders midway through the season. Deshaun Hamilton wasn't able to get anything done. So they are left with a hole. They need somebody, whether it's Henry Ruggs for his speed or whether it's somebody else for any other skill set they have going. I think they need to be in the wide receiver market. And again, it's a great draft to be needing one, whether you draft them in the first and you have any one of those superstars, or the depth in this class is phenomenal as well, whether you wait till later on and start attacking it in the second, third, mid rounds.
Denver's at a spot here because a lot of people are giving them the receiver at 15, and I've said this for a few different teams. If you walk away with a defensive tackle in round 1, I'm not thrilled in this draft. I don't think they have to force that now. That you bring in Jarrell Casey with a nice trade of a 7th rounder. That's a steal. I don't think they have to force a defensive tackle as much as people maybe thought that they did a few weeks ago. But they're sitting there at 15, and they must be hoping, okay, they're just doing the math right now. If you have all 4 offensive tackles go off the board, maybe you have 3 quarterbacks go off the board, that's 7. You have these 3 top receivers, or however you want to sort them out, between CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, and Henry Ruggs. That's 10. Who are the 5 other players or 4 other players that could go off the board to kind of free up one of those wide receivers? It's getting a little tight, but I think Denver, they could be a team. They've got 3 third-rounders. They could be a team that targets one of those receivers and moves up from 15 to 10 or to 8 or whatever it is without giving up a ton. I don't recommend the trade up in general. I could just see Denver doing that if they get a little impatient and they really want to get one of those top 3 receivers in the first round.
And
I think that's a great way to go for them.
I don't hate the idea necessarily of going for defensive tackle. It's more the Derek Brown pick is the one that would concern me for any team targeting defensive tackle or an interior player in the first round, because I just don't think that his style of play, as dominant as he is in college and as dominant as he might be at the next level, it's in a very specific area that I don't think is going to be valuable enough to be worth that top first round pick. So, his ceiling and the comp that people have talked about a lot is kind of Akeem Hicks, right? And as disruptive and dominant as Akeem Hicks is, I don't know if in today's NFL, that's the type of player you want to be building around. You want a guy that will disrupt in the passing game far more. So a Chris Jones style of player over an Akeem Hicks style of player, at which point I think you need to look at guys like Javon Kinlaw from South Carolina. I think he could be worth a decent high first round pick because he's a far more penetrating, pass rushing, disruptive kind of player. That I think is not a bad pick for a team like Denver. It's more the Derek Brown thing that would scare me away, particularly if he's still viewed as high a first round pick as he was kind of before the measurables and all that stuff started to work its way out.
We put cornerback as one of their other needs too. Now that you got Chris Harris moving on, so they bring in AJ Boye. They franchise Justin Simmons at safety. I knew that was going to happen all along. Knew that Justin Simmons was going to be the franchise guy in Denver.
They didn't tell you,
but we're talking about
that would help.
They're talking about Bryce Callahan out there, and Bryce Callahan's always played a little bit better in the slot. Isaac Yiadom. I mean, they don't have any other really dependable corners that have put together multiple good seasons. I wonder if corner is the spot too. Again, we talk about every team talking about wide receivers and corners, but it's a consistent trend. If you don't have two, which Denver doesn't have two clear corners, that could be good value if all three of those top receivers are off the board in the first.
Yeah, I'm curious what they think of the young guys that they have on the roster, because they could be a candidate to be a team a little bit like the 49ers, who, everyone was saying a year ago, they need corners, they got to start attacking that position. And all the way through, they were kind of like, no, look, we like the potential of the young guys on the roster. We're going to give them a chance to be better than they were a season ago. And ultimately they were proved kind of right, particularly with the resurgence that Richard Sherman had. I wonder if Denver are a candidate to be like, we actually like the guys on the roster. We're going to give them a chance to develop and not panic and go after corner that hard. Fair
point. And, Vic Fangio, he's done a nice job with, the Prince Amukamara's of the world and the Bryce Callahans of the world too, guys that have, not the biggest names, but that have played some solid football for him at the cornerback position. All right, moving on. We've got a couple AFC South teams, 3 AFC South teams, all coming up in a row here. How hard could it be? Starting with the Houston Texans, Sam. And their big need, this is kind of like when the Raiders traded Khalil Mack and their biggest need was pass rush, even though it was a good trade for the Raiders. The Texans need a primary option at wide receiver, according to PFF.com. Who's to argue?
Nobody. I mean, it's difficult to make any argument that doesn't say that. They traded away a number one wide receiver, one of the best in the NFL, and now their number one wide receiver is Will Fuller, who is often not healthy. So, yeah, they need receiving help, and they need a lot of it because their receiving core wasn't great even with Nuke Hopkins there. So, yeah, it reinforces how insane the trade was, because it's not like they even have a ton of draft capital to go and make that happen.
They got the 8th overall pick in the second round. So that will be the first time that the Texans draft. They don't have a first rounder, obviously. So they have the 8th pick of the second round, the 25th pick of the second round. And then after that, just 1 3, a 4, a 5, and 3 7s. So a team that does have, they came into the offseason with massive holes. Wide receiver, not one of them. They're still sitting here in the offseason with massive holes. Wide receiver, one of them. Now, if they want to have an explosive passing attack, now if they want to go, like I said on the last podcast, if they want to go full Deshaun Watson equals Lamar Jackson, we're going to run the ball like crazy and actually take the ball out of Watson's hand. That's one thing, but the receiving core needs help. They bring in Randall Cobb. They have Kenny Stills. They have Will Fuller, as you said. They still need more there. They don't need to get a number one option like DeAndre Hopkins. It could just be this, let's spread the ball around and all that. But the secondary is the big question mark for me. They bring back Bradley Roby. They could be one of those teams that thinks, hey, we spent a second on Lonnie Johnson last year at corner, and he wasn't great, but he can develop. But bringing in Eric Murray and bringing back Vernon Hargraves, it's a lot of patchwork in that secondary. To me, that's the biggest question mark, though, for the Texans outside of the receiver question.
So the receiver question, though, just sticking on that for a second, I think one of these first-round wide receivers is going to slip into the second, right? Partly because this draft class is so deep and so talented, I think teams are going to be like, look, we can wait a little bit. We don't need to go crazy in the first round. We can leave some of these guys for the second and third. So if you're the Texans, are you trying to replace the skill set of Nuke Hopkins, or just the fact that he is, the unquestioned number one target and the guy that Deshaun Watson is going to want to go after? Because a guy like T. Higgins from Clemson seems to me like the receiver that's most likely to fall out of the first round because of the questions about his speed and his athleticism and the fact that, separation was never exactly his greatest calling card in the first place. Even though he can separate, I think he's, the one with the biggest question mark in that regard. But I don't want to directly compare him to Luke Hopkins, but he's got a lot of those things working for him and, former Clemson receiver.
Yeah. Other people have made the comp, even outside of the Clemson deal. I don't think you need to replace that skill set, but, I'm a big believer in having different skill sets at the receiving position. And when you have an under 30-year-old Randall Cobb, as we realized on the last podcast, can still work the slot, and Kenny Stills and Will Fuller are your speed receivers. Having Nuke as the possession plus receiver, a big-bodied guy, was great. So, yeah, I think a Higgins would be a good fit there. The thing with Watson is he's aggressive, and he needs a guy that's going to bring aggressiveness out of him because like Joe Flacco was aggressive early in his career because he trusted Todd Heap and he trusted Anquan Bolden. He had guys to throw to. Once he lost those guys, he became like check down Joe and no longer had any value, with his big arm that could drive the ball down the field. There is some danger of that with Watson. So giving him a guy with ball skills like a Higgins that he could trust even when he's covered, I do think makes a lot of sense and could be the guy at the top of the second round. And then the trade is like, all right, it was T. Higgins and David Johnson for DeAndre Hopkins. Still doesn't look great, but I don't hate the idea of trying to replace him.
Right. Still a terrible trade, but at this point, it's about damage limitation. And can you actually replace 80% of Nuke Hopkins at the top of the second round and somehow come out of this in not a disastrous situation, which is what it looks like it is otherwise? I think T. Higgins seems to me like it seems like a natural sort of confluence of the way this stuff might unfold. Him slipping out of the first round, the Texans not having a first rounder, but desperately needing to replace that kind of skill set. The Clemson connection between Hopkins, Deshaun Watson, and T. Higgins. There's a lot of stars aligning for that to be the pick at the top of the second.
Yeah, either way, they're another team that's wide receiver and corner. If they did get a Higgins at the top of the second and then circled back, you might get some guys that are fringe first rounders on the PFF draft board that are still there. Late second, Jalen Johnson, the corner out of Utah, A.J. Terrell out of Clemson, Jeff Gladney out of TCU. I think any of those guys could still be available in the second round. Our draft board's always going to elevate corners higher than probably the NFL likes them anyway, so we think you'll be able to get some good value right there. But I think, the Texans, they just haven't replenished their roster since making the power move to go get Deshaun Watson. They've gone the other way, losing a ton of talent and just not getting enough draft capital back to replace them. And that's what's put them in a tough spot the last couple of years where they had to draft offensive line. And now they're in a point where it feels like they have to draft secondary help and wide receiver help because of the moves that they've made. So that's the issue. It's like the opposite of what we've described with the Bills. The Bills did a really nice job of filling out their roster with either solid players or a star like Stephon Diggs, and now they can draft whatever they want because it's all gravy at this point. There's no glaring need. Like the Texans are going in to the draft with glaring needs, which is inherently risky.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, we talked, the whole purpose of free agency is to eliminate glaring needs so that you can draft well, you can draft efficiently. You don't have to chase specific players at specific positions because if you don't have that starter, you're in real trouble. You can say, all right, in a perfect world, we might like a wide receiver, but the value is too good with this defensive lineman that's slipping. We're going to take him instead, and it's not going to harm us long term. The Texans have not done that. They've done, in fact, the exact opposite of that. And now they need the draft to plug giant holes in the roster, which is just a dangerous way to be approaching it, particularly when you don't draft until the second round. Like if you were picking third overall, it would be one thing, right? Because you're like, all right, we have a glaring need, but we pick at 3. We know that a quarterback and somebody else is going in the first 2. We are like 95% confident we're going to be able to pick or fill this spot with the one player that we want that answers all of our problems. That's not the worst idea in the world, though I'm not sure it's sound process. But the Texans don't pick until the second. Like anything could happen. Like there could be a run on the positions they need, and suddenly they're left either you have to try and trade up to stop the run, and you don't have the capital necessary to do it, or you just have to take the next best guy available who's not going to fix your problem.
No, do not just fill out the depth chart in the draft. Got to get valuable players and guys that you think are good. All right, let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts, a team that hasn't made a ton of moves this offseason, but they're all pretty big ones. Anthony Costanzo coming back at left tackle. The O-line is now locked in. They traded for DeForest Buckner. Obviously, they signed Phillip Rivers as well. The more you look at the Buckner trade, and you did a good job of laying out how they had to hit the salary floor, and we said they have this combination of really good long-term building, and now they can afford to tack on a Phillip Rivers and throw a DeForest Buckner long-term contract in there. The other thing is they have the second pick in the second round, and they have the 12th pick in the second round. So even though they gave up 13 overall, they still have two pretty valuable picks as far as the second round goes. And I think their biggest need is pretty clear here. It's finding receiver talent for Phillip Rivers. And for the 80th time in a row, we're going to reiterate, some of those receivers are going to be there at the top of the second round. And the same guy that you were trying to give the Texans, T. Higgins, feels like a very Phillip Rivers-y type of receiver potentially in the second round there.
I think T. Higgins is a very Phillip Rivers-y receiver that would help. I think my boy Denzel Mims, this is actually my boy as opposed to everybody you want to label as my boy.
Your real
Denzel
boy,
Mims,
Denzel
I think
Mims.
makes a lot of sense. And again, I think he could be in the second round as well. I don't know that he's going to elevate himself into the first, given how strong this group is. So a guy like Mims is, a do-it-all receiver that has a, very big-bodied, physical, does basically everything that T.Y. Hilton would not be considered particularly strong at. So again, a perfect match, A, with Phillip Rivers, and B, complementing that offense, or to complementing the fact that they already have T.Y. Hilton. And then the other question mark is Laviska Shenault, because he was the guy that, ran in the 4.6s because he ran through injury, is A, going to be getting injury fixed, and B, probably not going to have the chance to redo those numbers because of all the draft chaos. Is Shenault a guy that starts to slip out of the first round because there's now question marks that we aren't going to be able to get answered before that? Again, bigger bodied guy that can do a lot within that offense that T.Y. Hilton isn't necessarily suited to.
It's funny because I wonder if the exact scenario you just brought up, and we've done a lot of content right now saying, okay, what is all of this stuff? How's the draft going to be affected by everybody being on lockdown and all that stuff? And we said, look, the teams are probably going to be a little safer. They might not take a risk on an injury concern or a character risk or whatever it is. But I wonder if this is the draft where if you have a ton of third and fourth round picks and the Laviska Shenault of the world fall just because they can't run a pro day 40 or whatever it might be, and you just gobble up all those guys. We talked about that last year a lot for Jeffrey Simmons, right? The teams that, like the Raiders were the team we kept saying, they have 4 picks in the top 40. They should absolutely be taking Jeffrey Simmons. And he went higher than we expected, even, at 19 overall to the Titans. But I would be the team, if those guys fall to the third or fourth round, man, if I had I would use all my third and fourth round picks on character concerns, guys that couldn't run, that are really good football players, all that stuff. So it's a good point on Laviska. If they did add a Higgins, you're talking about an offense that added Paris Campbell in the second round last year. They still have to figure out how to unlock that potential. And, you can keep him as a gimmicky type of player like he was at Ohio State. You have a T.Y. Hilton. You have one other receiver to throw to. I just don't think you want to develop Paris Campbell into wide receiver 2 because there's still so many question marks if he can do that. So I think it's almost definite that the Colts are going to grab a receiver with one of those second round picks. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a major question mark as to whether Paris Campbell even has that in him. Like when you watched his targets at Ohio State, he didn't run receiver routes. Like him being projected as a wide receiver, like, was a hell of a stretch because he didn't play that at Ohio State. He played gimmick,
right?
And there were so few routes where he actually ran like legitimate pass patterns, NFL pass patterns, and was expected to play wide receiver. That sort of projecting how he would be able to do that based off a few snaps here and there, and the fact that he's really fast, was a hell of a stretch. So, I mean, he might be able to, but it's very much projecting an athlete that can do a few good things into a completely different role. So, year 2 is, I'm sure they have a decent idea of where he is in that development process, but it's by no means a sure thing that, year 2 is the year that Paris Campbell gets it and steps up into this role. But for all we know, he's never going to have that skill set, and they'll be moving in a different direction. Equally, they might have loved what they've seen from him in practice and think he's, really heading in the right direction. Actually, they're looking for number 3, not necessarily, a viable number 2. It's all sort of where they are internally with Paris Campbell's development based off practice reps and all that kind of thing.
Among the secondary needs for the Colts, edge rusher and corner, I would just keep an eye on some of the long corners in the second round as well. The Trevon Diggs, or the taller corners. Trevon Diggs, Cameron Dantzler. If Bryce Hall's there, still in the third, another guy coming off injury.
Yes.
The Colts have added a ton of second and third round corners the last couple of years, but it's not like they're completely stacked at that position. Rock Ya-Sin, Marvell Tell, Kenny Moore, there's Quincy Wilson. There's more to add at corner, so wouldn't be surprised to see more size added to that defense in the draft.
Trevon Diggs and Rock Ya-Sin would be a pretty A, physical, and B, imposing cornerback duo for the future.
And I'm still waiting to see if they're going to start playing a little bit more man coverage. They've been as zone heavy as any team the last couple of years. Getting one more Rock Ya-Sin type of press man corner might be what opens that up a little bit for the Colts. All right, staying in the how hard could it be AFC South, Jacksonville Jaguars. Biggest needs. I think, we've talked about, are they back in the quarterback market? Maybe, maybe not, but more specifically, cornerback now. They go from having Jalen Ramsey and AJ Boye the last couple of years to just massive question marks outside at corner. Offensive line still needs some depth and some help. And interior of the defensive line is another place. But yeah, top to bottom, this roster needing some love.
The Jags feel to me a little bit like the Minnesota Vikings in terms of, are you entirely sure what it is they're doing? They feel like they're in the middle of like a full-on blow-it-up rebuild, tank for 2021, et cetera, but then they do still go and, give around some decent money to guys like Joe Schobert. They've signed some players that I don't know that you would bother with if you were in full-on 2021 tank mode. I guess the franchise tag on Ngakoue can go either way because potentially they're still trying to deal him, even if they're
trying to
not.
Trade him. Yeah,
even if they're not, it's probably worth keeping him around for a year because he's a good player and he wants out anyway. So it's better than letting him walk. I guess you can let him walk this time a year from now. But obviously the move to trade away Nick Foles and roll with Gardner Minshew, they just feel like a team that doesn't have a particularly strong and solid and clear franchise direction.
They're going with the competitive rebuild, Sam. That's what I like to call it.
Competitive rebuild.
Competitive rebuild. Yeah,
is that actually
I might have
thing?
to. I think it goes back to my conversations with my wife Kelly. She said, "Look, you can't just breed losers to try to get the number 1 overall pick. You want dudes that win and that are going to be a part of the rebuild, but at the same time look to the future more than the present." So, look, Gardner Minshew. We joke about Ryan Fitzpatrick being tank proof. Gardner Minshew might be too good to tank with.
Yes,
he's pretty good. So, yeah, they're in an interesting spot. I don't hate their spot for the long term because they've got the 2 first-round picks this year. Maybe they can still steal another one for Yannick, at some point. But I like the idea of looking forward for Jacksonville. I thought they screwed up. And maybe not get another first-round pick, but get some sort of value back for him. There's a lot of rumors there.
I get something for him. He's giving him a first-round pick.
I just think it's got to be frustrating for the Jags that they spent 6 years of drafting in the top 10 to peak for 1 year and then start it all over again. That's the frustrating part. If you have 6 years, you should be able to have a sustainable good team for at least 3 or 4 years.
We were, looking at teams. We're doing. I don't know if anybody knows, but we're doing this Super Bowl watch along tonight, where we're all going to fire up a Super Bowl from a few years ago. You, me, Eric Eager, and Chris Collinsworth, plus a potentially special guest later on in the fourth quarter. But we were kind of looking through, teams over the last decade or so to figure out who we wanted to to watch. And it kind of struck me that both the Seattle Seahawks and the Denver Broncos had teams put together that both deserve more than one ring. They were able to assemble really incredible rosters and had the quarterback, whether it was Peyton Manning in his second go-round or whether it was Russell Wilson. They both had the quarterback plus an incredible team around them to be able to have sustained success. And they did. They got 2 multiple Super Bowls. They were in contention for a whole sequence of seasons in a row. And, things just broke against them and they were only able to come away with 1 ring each. The Jags almost did the same thing, except the difference is their quarterback was Blake Bortles, who was only able to half avoid incompetence for 1 year and then went completely in the tank and ultimately was bad enough to completely override everything that they'd built around him. And that's ultimately the problem, right? Is that quarterback is so important that if you have a great one, he can override almost everything else. But they're also so important that if you have one that's bad enough, it doesn't matter what's around him.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the big difference between Seattle and Jacksonville is obviously Russell Wilson versus Blake Bortles. But I think even from a Jags perspective, even just the narrative of what they are has changed. Again, a couple of years ago, it was why did they draft Leonard Fournette at 4? Because they didn't have any glaring needs on their team. And they felt hey, just throwing a running back on top of this thing is going to be okay, other than, obviously the quarterback position. But now it's all right, they could still use more on the D-line, which used to be loaded. Their secondary used to be loaded. It's a big question mark. Last year at this time, we were saying they've got one of the worst groups of playmakers in the NFL. At least DJ Chark emerged, but still a massive question. They have question marks at all the most important positions on the field.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other reason for Leonard Floyd is that they recognized that they had a disastrous quarterback and tried to take the ball out of his hands as much as humanly possible. The problem is that there's basically just no way of hiding a crappy quarterback in today's NFL. It's not going to happen. You might want to try and take the ball out of his hands as much as possible and run the ball, but unless that guy, unless the quarterback can himself be a major part of the run game, like Lamar Jackson or Taysom Hill even, right? You can't, unless you can build an offense around them that leans on the fact that they can be massive rushing threats, you can't affect the fact that you ultimately need him to pass the ball efficiently to some degree. And Bortles was only able to do that for a brief period of time. The fact that they brought Leonard Fournette on board basically didn't affect it one iota. Bortles was still crushing Fournette's production because of how bad he was playing and the fact that teams didn't have to do anything to deal with it.
All right, as far as draft capital goes, Jags are in pretty good shape. They got 2 firsts, both 9 and 20 overall. Yeah. 10th pick in the second round. They have a 3rd. They have 2 4s, 2 5s, 2 6s, and a 7. So they're a team that, could do some maneuvering. I think they're a team that can do some maneuvering for next year. I do think their best strategy, start to flip these guys into the future and then get into that Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields sweepstakes. As much as Gardner Minshew is valuable as a 6th rounder and it's a cool story and all that stuff, you're still in the Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes. So I think using, some of these top picks to start looking ahead like Miami did last year at this time, I think would be really smart for the Jags.
Anybody that's looking to be in that Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence / whoever the Joe Burrow coming from nowhere is next year, anybody that's legitimately thinking that that is their strategy and has a lot of draft capital this year should be trying to flip half of their picks for the equivalent pick in a year's time plus a round. You know what I mean? So 3rd year pick
absolutely.
This year, or 3rd round pick this year becomes a 2nd round pick next year. 2nd round pick next year becomes a 1st next year. The trade value chart essentially values almost all these picks plus a round if you're kicking it to the future. If you're kicking your entire season to the future anyway, let's improve your capital by a round in the process across the board. So if you've got a ton of it, sure, you need to spend it on some players this year, but let's flip half of your picks for something better in a year's time, because that's when you expect to be using them anyway.
That is exactly, New England has done a great job of that, but smart teams have been doing that for a while. trade in this year's third for next year's second, or this year's fourth for next year's third, because teams do say, look, I'd rather have the pick now, a round later, and get the extra year out of a guy. But teams that could slow play it and have some patience, you steal an extra round.
And I think it's worth doing generally just as a strategy, right? If you know you're not going to be contending this year and you're actually looking to the future, start trying to improve the value of the capital you have essentially for free. All you're doing is costing yourself time, which you're not expecting to be contending now anyway. But this year, it could be even more critical because there's the added chaos of the whole COVID-19 stuff with the draft, right? It's going to affect evaluations. How much is an unknown quantity, but the way the combine worked this year, right? It's we're shifting all the workouts to late at night. We don't know what effect that's going to have. There were a ton of agents that just said, look, we're not messing with it. Screw it. We're not working out. Somebody else can experiment and figure out how this works. We'll deal with it next year, right? That's basically what you'd be doing here, is saying, look, I don't know how much it's going to affect evaluations, but we're going to minimize the effect it does have by flipping all of our draft capital for the equivalent plus a bit of value in 2021.
All right, so the Jags have quite a bit of holes to fill, and I think my goal with the first round picks, pick a player and trade down as much as possible, trade into next year as much as possible. Kansas City Chiefs, the Super Bowl champs, still looking at cornerback probably as their biggest question mark. Right now we're looking at Charvarius Ward, Keith Reeser, Rashad Fenton, guys that are just filling out the depth chart there. They won a Super Bowl without great corners, but it doesn't mean they can't improve.
Where do you stand on this? Is this a good thing or a bad thing that the Chiefs are the Super Bowl champions and have this degree of glaring hole on the roster?
Oh, that's a good thing for the future of the Chiefs. I mean, look, we talked about it all the time. The offense dictates things. The defense, they just needed to get back toward an average group, and they strategically went from a man coverage team to more of a zone heavy team where you could, hide your corners a little bit more, and they got great play from their safeties. I thought their strategy last year was to have versatile safeties like Tyrann Mathieu and Juan Thornhill, who got hurt but was excellent as a rookie before the injury, was to have they tried to own the middle of the field, which is not a bad way of doing things either. Think about that just from an analytics standpoint or an NFL standpoint. We talked about the slot being a little bit more valuable than the outside corners. So if you have a versatile safety who is covering the slot and is essentially playing a robber role and taking away those high-value routes, then you're even without great name talent, just schematically you're taking away important pieces for the opposing offense. So I thought they did a great job, but it all still comes down to Mahomes. Like, there are people trying to justify the Frank Clark deal where he's the highest paid guy on the team. The Frank Clark deal is still terrible. He still wasn't very good. It wasn't justified because they won a Super Bowl. Patrick Mahomes and the offense won a Super Bowl, and the defense is along for the ride.
So, yes, agreed with the Frank Clark thing. I think Frank Clark, the transition or the swap, essentially, from D Ford to Frank Clark made that team worse. And I know that technically speaking, like D Ford has effectively cost them a Super Bowl, and Frank Clark was part of them winning one. But whatever, they were a worse team.
If you just sum it up by one play, because Frank Clark had a sack and D Ford had an offsides. Yes.
Yeah, but in terms of like net impact, D Ford is a better force for them than Frank Clark was overall. So getting back to the cornerback thing, here's the thing. I think there are a couple of teams that have started, I don't even know if it's conscious or not, but if they've just headed in that direction and it's working out, I think there are a couple of teams that have started to work out that cornerback is actually not this all-important position that it used to be, that if you don't have them, you're screwed, right? Because you don't have to go back that far, and there's a couple of teams that still play this way, where man coverage was everything. And if you didn't have a corner that could man up, you were going to get toasted every single play, and your secondary was garbage, and there was nothing you could do about it because those guys were expected to track a receiver wherever he went. And if they couldn't, that guy was going to be wide the hell open on the back end. Now, though, the whole league has transitioned towards varieties of zone defense, whether it's the single high shells or the Seattle cover 3, cover 1 style systems, whether it's the cover 2, 4, 6 type systems where teams are using the split field safeties. The point is, everything is working in zones now. So you don't expect these corners necessarily to have to cover the entire field. And actually, if you get really good players in the safety spots and at linebacker, you can actually start to really shrink the amount of ground that you need cornerbacks to be able to cover and really cut down on the number of routes you expect them to deal with. And suddenly you get to this position where you can actually hide cornerback play really quite efficiently. And, you know, look at the team like the Vikings, right? The Vikings had pretty bad cornerback play last season, but they had two of the top, 5 safeties in the NFL last season in Anthony Harris and Harrison Smith. They had arguably the best coverage linebacker in the NFL last season in Eric Kendricks. Suddenly you've got a guy who can run the seam, take away a ton of that stuff. You've got safeties that can break from the middle or from split field looks to anything that the corner gives up behind them. Now the cornerback really doesn't have to cover that much ground before he gets beat. And as you said, the Chiefs are doing a similar thing where they're trying to own the middle of the field, forcing everything really wide to have those cornerbacks not have to cover that much ground. I think there is a blueprint in today's NFL to really hide crappy cornerback play in a way that didn't used to exist.
I just think it comes down to playing to your personnel, man. That's what it comes down to. They were, for a few years, I mean, people are joking about the Chiefs cornerbacks being terrible the last couple of years, but the previous years before that, they were given all of the top quarterbacks all sorts of issues, whether it was Tom Brady, whether it was Phillip Rivers, it didn't matter. You know, Peyton Manning, even toward the end of his career before he even regressed, he would have some struggles against, you know, really good man coverage that the Chiefs were trotting out there. They just ran out of good bodies that could play a man, and in 2018, they didn't change the scheme, and it was, you know, Bob Sutton was doing some really good things there for a while, and they just ran out of steam. And then last year, Spags, my boy Spags, he comes in and plays to their personnel a little bit better. So all that said, I'd still rather see them have more talented players at corner. It's still better for your team. And, you know, once again, when we look at our draft board, there's a lot of players in that 25 to 50 range at corner in our rankings that could be extremely valuable players there at the end of the first round for the world champion Chiefs. They only have 5 draft picks, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. No 6s and 7s.
Who do you like the most from a schematic point of view in terms of cornerbacks that could be available at the back end of the first round for the Chiefs?
I like Bryce Hall a little bit, but for them, zone skills and everything, I don't think, maybe not back end of the first round for him with the injury concerns, but I think he's a guy that could get second or third. Back end of the first, do you have a good fit there? AJ Terrell maybe? For
Terrell
Clemson
was the one
Jalen?
that was leaping to mind for me. Yeah. I really like what AJ Terrell could do in that scheme. I think that would be a really natural fit. And as I say, I think that so as much as cornerback is a glaring need for them, I think it's a really cornerback friendly environment right now. I think a first round corner could come in there and be surprisingly effective year one, because I think that job is easier than it is a lot of other teams.
Javarius Ward too is actually a pretty good man coverage corner, and if they had another guy there, like, you know, it opens up some flexibility for the defense. All right. Mm-hmm. Las Vegas Raiders and the Los Angeles Chargers. This isn't right here. It is Las Vegas because it's LA. They're next, man. Mm-hmm. Las Vegas Raiders. Big need for the Raiders.
Messing up everybody's alphabetization.
I know, right? Help in the secondary for the Raiders. Yes. I think they've made. What do you think of some of the moves that they've made so far this offseason? We're talking about a lot of players coming in. Kwiatkowski at linebacker, Corey Littleton at linebacker, Eli Apple, Jeff Heath, Malik Collins. That's 5 potential starters just on the defense alone.
Yeah, I like the moves they've made. I think they've actually quietly done a really good job of free agents. They haven't overpaid massively for anybody. They've brought in players, at least a couple of which should be pretty dramatic upgrades right from day one. And I think they've rolled the dice in a couple of spots that doesn't hurt. You know, Malik Collins has some talent. I've never really loved what he's done in the NFL, but I think as a sort of reclamation, kick the tires project, I think that makes a lot of sense. Eli Apple's a similar case, right? He's got some talent, particularly in man coverage, hasn't necessarily lived up to where he was drafted, but this whole offseason was about reclamation project corners and rolling the dice on one of them and seeing what you can get. So I think quietly they've done a really good job in free agency. and set themselves up quite well. And like a ton of these other teams, their biggest needs remaining are receiver and corner, the two areas we keep preaching on about. And honestly, as much as it's sort of the way the NFL has gone, it's a good year for that to be the thing you're chasing heading into the draft.
Yeah, again, I've said double up at receiver for the Raiders would be a great way to go. I still think the depth chart's saying that's possible, but I also look at the secondary of Eli Apple and Trayvon Mullen as the starting corners, couple, 6 foot plus, long corners, opens up their ability to play a little bit more man. They still like to play a lot of zone there under Gunther, but man, they could use, some more security there in the secondary for sure. Still don't know what you're going to get from Jonathan Abram back there. Jeff Heath is he's the guy that's going to get everybody lined up, the veteran guy that's going to make sure you're in the right play, but he's not spectacular. But they've taken steps in the right direction there. But I think, similar to the Bills, there's not glaring needs, but there's needs, right? So I think receiver would be a great way to go. Get those speed guys, maybe one of those, a Judy or a Lamb there at 12 would be
so that's
fantastic
the thing, right?
for the Raiders.
They're in a really good spot because they pick 12 and 19, so could potentially get a top end player, probably not the first, but a top end player at both cornerback and wide receiver. So let's give them the ideal guy, right? Who's the best receiver they can get and the best cornerback they can get? I would assume receiver at 12 and corner at 19, but you could convince me otherwise.
So we have Judy just above Lamb. I think for the Raiders, I think CeeDee Lamb, because I think I want somebody that's going to extract some aggressiveness. And Lamb, I think his skill set's a little bit closer to Amari Cooper as an outside receiver. And when Carr was thrown to Cooper and the trust that he had throwing the fade and the back shoulder down the field and their connection, I could see Carr and Lamb having a great connection outside. And you have Hunter Renfrow already in the slot. So I think fit for the Raiders, CeeDee Lamb would be fantastic. I think that would be good for Carr.
Do you think that of those two, I have this feeling that of the two, Jerry Jeudy is going to slip in this draft? I'm not talking like slip out of the first round or anything, but it feels like one of them could still be a top 10 player and the other one's going to slip into the teens somewhere. And I could see Jerry Jeudy being that guy where teams suddenly start to get twitchy about, well, most of his production was the slot and doesn't win the contested catches, which is the thing we have to chase, even though, Jeudy feels like a guy that might start to fall into the teens where a team like the Raiders could snag him.
I could absolutely see that. Plus Jeudy only ran in the 4.4s, right? And he looked like a 4.3 guy, and Ruggs looked like a 4.2 guy. It feels like there's a big difference here. And I could see a lot of teams chasing speed for Ruggs, and Ruggs gets elevated. Lamb looks like a better all-around option because of all the reasons I just described. I don't think that's crazy. I would take both of them, though, if you had the option.
Oh, sure.
I'd take both.
Yeah. I mean, overall, I think Judy's general athleticism numbers were underwhelming compared with what he looks like on tape. I think he's the guy that's more likely to slip, or more to the point of the two, Lamb is more likely to be gone where the Raiders pick. But I do agree with you. I think he would be the ideal one to be there at 12 if they could snag him. And then at 19, the cornerback I would really like to see with the Raiders is C.J. Henderson from Florida.
C.J. Henderson,
again,
yes.
Bigger, longer, or cornerback. I think he's got a lot of skills suited to that defensive scheme. I think he could come in, be a starter from day one, and help upgrade that secondary.
I like it. Yeah, here's the other thing about the Raiders, right? This is the tail end of the Khalil Mack trade right here. You got the one more first-round pick, and you're going to go back and look at, okay, what did they get over the last couple of years? It's Cleveland Farrell and Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Abram in last year's first round, and then these two first-rounders. And you're going to stitch that all together and say, okay, it was Khalil Mack essentially for these other, replaced him with these other three first-rounders, and how did that all stack up? So it's a big draft again for the Raiders this year. All right, before we move on, quick break to tell you about our friends over at Mint Mobile. If you're still using one of the big wireless providers this year, have you asked yourself, what are you paying for? Sam, you want me to take it through or is this your thing?
Well, yeah. Take me through what you're still paying for, Steve, like a sucker.
I don't know what I'm paying for. Between expensive retail stores, inflated prices, hidden fees, we're all being taken advantage of because they know we'll pay, Sam, but that's where Mint Mobile comes in. Mint Mobile provides the same premium network coverage that you're used to, but at a fraction of the cost because everything is online. Mint Mobile saves on retail locations and overhead, then passes those savings directly to you. And this is kind of the wave of the future, right? Lose the middleman, just go straight through Mint Mobile.
Yeah, this is Netflix to Blockbuster's, video cassette rental stores. They're obsolete. They shouldn't exist anymore. There's no reason to have a brick and mortar phone store that you need to go in and sort out your wireless provider. The whole thing is done online. You don't need to waste all that money on renting those buildings, staffing them with people. Just, it's online. They rent the mobile time, the network time off one of the giant carriers. Was exactly the same service, only it's a hell of a lot cheaper and more efficient because the whole thing's online, delivered to your door.
So Mint Mobile makes it easy to cut your bill to just $15 a month. Every plan comes with unlimited nationwide talk and text. With Mint Mobile, stop paying for unlimited data you will never use. You can choose between plans of 3, 8, or 12 gigabytes of 4G LTE data. And then you can also use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan. Keep your same phone number along with all your existing contacts, ditch your old wireless bill, and start saving with Mint Mobile. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and get the plan shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/PFF. That's mintmobile.com/PFF. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/PFF. All right, after the Las Vegas Raiders, we stay in the division. Well, only a couple more teams left here, I think. 4 more teams. Yikes. How fast are we going?
What did you
Los Angeles Chargers.
What did you think of the glorious Los Angeles Chargers logo overhaul?
Yeah. Everybody needs to stop overhauling everything.
I mean, theirs was so overhauled that it was hard to find what they did.
Yeah.
Like the Rams, at least, was a significant overhaul, right? There's some discussion to be had there. The Chargers come out like 2 days later. It's like, oh,
they move a bolt somewhere?
Right. We added a slight bolt to here. It's just, you're already like playing second fiddle to this team, living in their building. Like, come on. You can't come out like 2 days after everyone was hating on their logo reveal and be like, hey, we did it as well. Only nothing really changed.
Maybe they should spend more time studying their playbook, Sam. That's what I think, instead of changing logos. So I thought the Chargers, we've talked about this quite a bit already on the pod too. They've done some nice things this offseason, but still need a left tackle, continue that offensive line overhaul. Still need a quarterback besides Tyrod Taylor and maybe a third wide receiver.
Yeah, I mean, the offensive line, I think, is the thing, regardless of who the quarterback is. They were completely unable to put one in front of Phillip Rivers for basically the guy's entire career. We've made some moves so far in free agency. Brian Bulaga should be a big upgrade at right tackle. They traded for Trey Turner, getting rid of Russell Okung in the process. It's hard to know what that would be. I think they did at least get younger in that trade. I'm not sure they got better. It's been a long time. Like 2015, I think, was Trey Turner's best season. So it's been a while since we've seen him actually play particularly well, but the potential is there. And then, you need to solve your left tackle spot. So I think they're in a really interesting spot at 6, right? They're pick 6 overall.
Yeah.
They could get potentially the best tackle on the board. They could potentially grab Jeffrey Okudah. I talked about that before. I love that as a fit in that secondary. They could be, given how diverse and freaky and interchangeable their secondary is, they could be in the sweepstakes for Isaiah Williams, right?
Simmons.
Isaiah Simmons, sorry. And then they could also be in the sweepstakes for quarterbacks, right? Whether it's, do we move up and try and get in the Tua sweepstakes, or do we move down and try and get the Justin Herbert, Jordan Love, or do we stand pat and reach for one of those guys? They're kind of one of the pivot points of the first round of this draft. They could go in so many different directions, all of which I think make a lot of sense.
Yeah, they're interesting because the rest of their roster is really good. I mean, the Chargers tend to charger anyway, and they lose more games than they should, other than once every 5 years. But on paper, again, they look really good once again this season. So it would be tough for them to be in full tank mode, which makes me think. I think at 6 overall, it's either they're taking a shot at quarterback because they love Justin Herbert, or they're going tackle. The question, if they go tackle, though, is, okay, what are you doing at quarterback long term? Because you have Tyrod. Are they gonna sit and wait, or pick up Cam Newton? Are they gonna late swoop in for Jameis Winston or something? I don't know. I mean, their long-term quarterback question mark still looms, despite having one of the best secondaries, one of the best groups of playmakers, an improved offensive line. All these things don't matter.
How much is their quarterback situation or outlook, or the way we're phrasing it right now, determined entirely by the fact that they're in a division with Patrick Mahomes? Like, if you took Patrick Mahomes out of the equation and just said, this is the Chargers roster heading into the 2020 season and Tyrod Taylor is the quarterback, how much better would their prospects be?
I don't think it matters a ton, to be honest. I think just the fact that we think that offense matters more than defense, and that we know that you have to kind of dictate. You have to be able to win shootouts in the NFL because the average game is essentially an old school shootout. That's just the NFL. You have to be able to score points. And the Tyrod take care of the football style. So I think the Chargers could be looking at this and saying, we're going to be the opposite of the Chiefs. We're going to take care of the football. We're going to play defense, and we're just going to have 8 possessions per team a game. I think they could actually be doing that, but I don't think that's the right way to. It's chasing it's a risky style to chase. To your points.
And remember what that Tyrod Taylor offense started to look like in Buffalo when they actually built the run game around him a lot. They kind of preempted a lot of what the Ravens are doing, except obviously Tyrod Taylor isn't Lamar Jackson. So there's an offense to be had there that's quite successful and potentially does play against what the Chiefs want to do. We talked before about one of the ways to frustrate and irritate and limit those high-octane passing offenses is to run the ball, keep them off the field, and just frustrate them. Because if you can get one stop, suddenly it's like, crap, we haven't been on the field for the last 25 minutes, and we actually need to connect on this next drive, right? And then if they don't do that twice, suddenly they're in a hole that they feel, and it starts to get them twitchy and stressed out. So there's a chance that the Chargers could be trying to build another Baltimore Ravens, only obviously instead of Lamar Jackson, it's Tyrod Taylor. But, Tyrod Taylor's not the worst quarterback in the world either.
Yeah, I get it. I understand. With all that talent there and the guys to throw to and everything, I think they need an upgrade. So I think it's going to be Herbert or tackle at 6 overall. For the Chargers, also have a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th. They are the team that just has their usual allotment of picks in this draft, what they have. Yeah, but they've done some nice things defensively, but question marks about the offense.
Are they a team that would make sense to target the elusive 2nd round quarterback, right? You take tackle at the top of the 1st because aside from anything else, you just don't love the quarterback situation there. Instead of trying to trade back and hope the guy that you like, say a Justin Herbert, is still there at 18 or whatever, say, screw it, we're going to take the best tackle in the draft, take him at number 6. And then in our 2nd round, we're going to, target a guy like Eason.
Yeah, look, I don't mind. I would rather take a shot in the 2nd round than the 1st round, right? So you at least get the player, you at least get a starter at a position of need for the last 10 years. So you have that sorted out potentially. I don't mind taking a 2nd round shot at a quarterback, but they're a team that has that minimum amount of draft capital. I'd rather see them moving the other way and trading down. I'd take a 3rd round shot, but my 3rd round shots are like Jordan Love, who could go in the 1st. So they're in a tricky spot because they don't have the roster to be in the Trevor and Field sweepstakes, but they also they don't have the pick right now to be Tua or Burrow either. So truly, If they traded multiple picks to just go get Tua this year, though, I wouldn't hate that either. If they sacrificed this year's draft to get Tua, and then said, okay, now next year it's trade down land, right? Because you could do 1 year of trading up, and this is where the Jets have made a mistake. We still have the Jets to do. This is where they've made a mistake. They did the 1 year trade up for Darnold, and they never got those picks back to replenish that roster. The Chargers could do that this year. 1 year trade up, trade down a million times in the future.
I mean, honestly, well, the difference is I honestly think you can do it for a quarterback as long as you get the quarterback, right? If Tua is the guy, trading up for him is not the worst thing in the world, particularly because, as we've just said, this roster is in good shape. The Jets' problem is that they went for the quarterback. They maybe got him or maybe didn't, but the point is they then needed to build a roster around him and didn't have the ammunition to do it anymore. The Chargers are already there. They just need the quarterback, so you can go after that guy with an aggressive trade, and even if it costs you, a ton of potential roster spots this year, you're fine, right? You're in a good shape. You just need to plug a couple of holes at that point. I think honestly, trading up for Tua might be the Chargers' best possible option. Like if they can swing that might be the best thing they could do for long-term contention.
That would be awesome to see. All right, New York Jets they're not. Miami Dolphins are next. I wanted to transition right to the Jets, but I scrolled too far. The Dolphins, they've been pretty active this offseason in free agency, and, they are in control of the draft, essentially. They've got the 5th, 18th, and 26th picks in the first round, 2 second-rounders, a 3rd, 4th, 3 5ths, a 6th, and 3 7s for the Dolphins. Unlikely.
There's no way they're not coming out of the draft with Tua, though, right? Like with that draft capital, they have to.
No, I think that's their play. I think that'll be their play, unless they love. There was rumors that they loved Herbert. You just never know what teams are thinking, but I think they come out of it with Tua. Yes.
Yeah, and the only question is how much it's going to cost them to make it happen. What's interesting is when you look at the guys they added a ton of them, but how much better did they actually get? Byron Jones, I think, is the marquee signing. That's a big impact playmaker that could potentially change the dynamic of that secondary. But then Eric Flowers, Jordan Howard, Shaq Lawson, Ted Karras, Kyle Van Noy, Emmanuel Ogbah, Adrian Colbert. Like it's not propelling this team dramatically in a direction necessarily.
No, but you know what this one reminds of? It's like New England's done a really good job with their middle class. The problem here is that these middle class guys were probably all overpaid. The Emmanuel Ogbahs and Eric Flowers of the world, and it's what you invested in these guys. If you just said, hey, these guys all came in on reasonable contracts, and I'm like, wow, Ted Karras comes in, that's a good step in the right direction. Ogbah's a good rotational player. They bring in Kyle Van Noy to a familiar system to play a familiar role. Okay, that's a potential win. And then, okay, we broke the bank for Byron Jones. Great. We have Jones and Howard, and, that's a step forward at corner. Problem is, I think they paid a lot of money for these guys. Yes.
The Dolphins and the Lions both feel like they're just trying to do a bad imitation of what worked in New England. It's like we'll get New England guys, we'll pay them a lot of money because we know they work. But the whole point of those New England guys, that middle class, is that they were able to assemble those guys for peanuts, and it functioned because you had Brady and Belichick for 20 years. Like you can't just go, well, okay, we'll take the non-consequential part of what was working in New England, make it worth a lot more money by paying it more, and then try and fix the thing that was like the keystone to the whole thing by, drafting a Tua or whatever. Like it seems like they're both just going about this in the wrong way.
Yeah, I hear you, man. It's not. I think there's something to the familiarity aspect of it, but the way you laid it out, which is like, okay, I still think Brady's the foundation, and Belichick is on top of that, and then everything else is kind of like, hey, they made some other pretty good decisions, but it's more like the run game to the Belichick and Brady owning the pass game type of deal. So Dolphins need a quarterback of the future. I think they're going to package picks to go get Tua. Great. That should be the move if they have to do it. Then it's offensive line and safety that we looked at for, other potential holes. I like Eric Rowe as a safety, not necessarily as a corner for the Dolphins, but Rashad Jones is gone. O-line is still a disaster as long as Julian Davenport is out there. We could have Julian Davenport and Eric Flowers playing football right next to each other next year.
I mean, honestly, that offensive line is a train wreck, even with the additions they've made. They had, I think, the worst offensive line in the NFL last season, according to pass blocking efficiency. It was a total and complete disaster in a year that was historic for wreckages of offensive lines. The Dolphins was as bad as anything out there, and so far what they've added to it is Eric Flowers and Ted Karras. That's not fixing things. You need a pair of tackles. This line needs a lot of help. They need to attack that in the draft over and over.
All right, I think we have 4 more teams to roll through, starting with the New England Patriots. Speaking of the Patriots, what do they need, Sam?
Well, they need a quarterback, but they're probably not doing that in the draft, right?
Yeah, I just can't wait. This was when Chip Kelly took over in Philadelphia. He had 2 pretty good seasons, and then in 2015 he got to run the personnel department. Didn't go great, but one of the things I was fascinated about was getting into Chip Kelly's mind, a guy who was innovative in college and innovative in the NFL, and then you got to see what he valued specifically. This is our opportunity with Belichick to get into his mind. We've never seen him find a quarterback other than spending a second-round pick on Jimmy Garoppolo as Brady insurance, assuming that by the end of that Brady contract, Garoppolo would take over. That's the only time we've really gotten into Belichick's head as far as QB evaluation and maybe what he values and how he would structure it. Now he's sitting there with mid-tier options, draftable options, not great options, certainly not compared to what he had. I think this is, just an incredible story, getting to see what does Belichick want to do at quarterback over the next 2 years. I think it's a 2-year thing for the Patriots because there's no clear options right now.
That's the thing. I think it almost has to be. It's interesting. We've seen he drafted a lot of quarterbacks over the years. He tended to take these mid-round shots. You're right. Garoppolo was the one that bumped him up into the second round from the third. But
that was the one where he said, I might actually need this guy. He's going to be we're grooming this guy for the future, not we're just taking a shot on Ryan Mallett and Jacoby Brissett and whoever else.
Right. So there was Ryan Mallett, Jacoby Brissett was a third rounder. Kevin O'Connell, right, was a third rounder.
Zach Robinson.
A lot of swings at these kind of he's taking a lot of swings at these kind of third round quarterbacks, none of whom have really panned out. I guess you can argue the Jacoby Brissett thing, but does he just do that again? Let's just add one more third round quarterback to this roster. But ultimately, if you're replacing Tom Brady, you are either picking up the phone to bring in a Cam Newton, or you're no, we're looking to the top of the draft and we can't get there this year. So we're looking for 2021.
I really don't think it's far-fetched to think that they roll with Jarrett Stidham. For all of, for as poorly as Stidham played at Auburn, he looked very good in the Patriot system in the preseason last year. And he didn't, if you told me in 2015 that Jarrett Stidham would be a coveted QB prospect back in 2014 or 15, I would have said that's there was a point in his career where that looked legit. Jarrett Stidham looked like a legitimate, really good NFL prospect coming out of high school, first year at Baylor, but he went to an Auburn offense that just wasn't a good fit for him. He didn't play well in that system, just wasn't good. So I don't think it's crazy or far-fetched that the Patriots just say, did we steal a Jarrett Stidham in the 4th round? Let's see for this year. And he's either good for us, or he's not good, and now we're in the next guy sweepstakes. I really think that's where they are.
Yeah, I think there's a very real chance that they are rolling with Stidham for 2020, but that is very firmly saying that they are in the top of the draft, Fields, Lawrence, whoever, sweepstakes for 2021. I don't think I think there is a very, very minimal chance that they think that Jarrett Stidham has any long-term future as the starting quarterback of the New England Patriots. I think there's a very real chance that they think he is a 2020 starter that's bad enough to propel them up the draft to where they need to be to snag a quarterback that can actually replace Brady long term. And they feel like the kind of team that would do what we talked about doing with the Jags, where if that's their plan, they're going to start flipping picks for future picks. Like 23 this year maybe becomes a first and a second this year. You know, they trade out of the first round to pick in the top of the, or to pick somewhere in the second round and pick next year's first along with that. I think this is a team that could start dealing a lot for future picks.
So they have 12 picks, I believe it is, 8 of which are on day 3. So they have first round pick, number 23 overall, no second, 3 thirds, and then 4 5, 4 6s. You just package the 4 6s maybe for a first round. It'd be like an old Madden trade. I'll give you my 4 6s and 2 7s, and I'll throw in a 5 for your 1.
Yeah.
So yeah, here's the deal. If they're going to draft a quarterback this year, they're either going to sit there at 23 and a guy that they like a Jordan Love, is still there and they draft him, or they take a mid-round shot in round 3 with one of their 3 third-round picks. It's Jacob Eason, it's Jake Fromm still there, whatever it might be. Other than that, like, they can't move up from the second to sneak back into the first round. I mean, that's it as far as picks. So I could absolutely see them flipping for the future. The rest of the roster, though, one of the reasons why Brady left is he had nobody to throw to. That's still the case. And if anything, you know, they lost Philip Dorsett to free agency, and like there's a million question marks at receiver. The O-line looks solid, and then the defense has lost a lot of talent on the back 7. Not that it's not crippling the way the Patriots play football, but you know, they have some other holes that they need to fill in their front 7.
Yeah, they do. This roster is not in great shape. I mean, even with Tom Brady, I think we would be talking about them coming under significant pressure from the Bills heading into the season as the top team in the division. Without Tom Brady, it's not good at all. And what's going to be interesting to watch what they do with the receiver situation. And I use receiver to bucket wide receiver and tight ends. You know, the talk was, what do they do to make enough moves at receiver to convince Tom Brady to come back? Well, Brady didn't come back. So now do they feel liberated to be able to say, I'm not doing anything, because I think N'Keal Harry is still a number 1 in waiting. And I think, you know, Julian Edelman will be better when everybody's not bracket covering him. And Mohamed Sanu won't be injured this year, so he'll be better. Like, do they basically do what the 49ers secondary thing and say, no, look, we like the guys that are here. They got screwed last year through injury and circumstance. This year, we think it's actually a much better group, and basically just sit there and roll into the season expecting it to be better. Maybe they're the team that takes the first tight end in this sport. It's not a good tight end group, but maybe they're the team that upgrades there because they're the only team vaguely desperate for a tight end, and they do like the situation that the wide receivers are this season.
It's not a crazy thought because, yeah, like if Brady was coming back, you're not going to sit there and say, okay, N'Keal, go develop with Tom Brady in year 2. Just go. We're just going to force feed you 90 targets and see what happens. But if Stidham's the guy, why not try to maximize Harry's potential and just throw him out there and see what he can do? And Edelman's there. And Sanu, if he's healthy, probably isn't as bad as he looked last year. So, yeah, it's not a crazy thought, Sam, that, like, it's a different group of playmakers because you're willing to handle some growing pains from a N'Keal Harry or, you know, see other guys develop just because you're developing with Stidham rather than saying, hey, we got to win one more with Tommy before he, you know, becomes 50 years old. So it's not crazy, but yeah, they've got a lot of holes, pass rusher, another place that they can go. But it'll all start with figuring out what they do at quarterback, which I think is going to be Stidham at this point. All right, let's move on. AFC East. We got 3 teams left, Sam. New York Jets. Haven't done it. You and I have. Yeah, Jets, Steelers, and Titans, according to my calculations.
Okay.
The Jets, you and I both wrote this week that they've done a poor job of building around Sam Darnold, both offensive line and receiver. They had to attack offensive line with volume. Some options were good, some weren't. But I think they had to go offensive line first, and they did that certainly this free agency.
Yeah, I mean, so part of the thing with the Jets is that they have a clear strategy, which I've criticized a few teams for not having. I think they do have a clear strategy. I'm just not sure it's the right one. I think the other issue is that not all of it is the current regime's fault. They're working with a hand that's already been dealt to them in terms of some of the trades that have been made in the past, and they are where they are. But because of that, I think that needs to change your principles. I think that needs to change what you would normally do because of the situation you're facing, which is, we have this quarterback that we think is the guy, and if we don't help him out, we're wasted him. We have to do the whole thing over again, and we're actually in a worse situation than we were. So instead of like the whole offensive line needs to be overhauled. So let's roll the dice on 5 guys, each of whom has like a 50-50 shot of being an upgrade over the guy that was there before him, and maybe a couple of them pan out, and then we're good. Alternatively, I think you could have said, all right, let's definitely secure a couple of upgrades, right? Let's guarantee there are a couple of upgrades, even if we have to overpay for them, or we have to get an older guy who's not a long-term fix. Let's guarantee we're better in a couple of spots and then start rolling the dice for maybe upgrades. And they didn't do that. And then a receiver, it's the same kind of idea, right? It's okay, there are some problems with Robbie Anderson, whether it's off field or whether it's the fact that it hasn't worked so far. But, he was still one of your best receivers. And now what is your receiving core? It's Jamison Crowder, who's a slot guy who can be useful, and Le'Veon Bell, and nobody else. You didn't get better. And now you're rolling into the draft again with 2 monster holes that you need to fix. And Perriman's a similar thing, right? He might be as good as Robbie Anderson, but it's a gamble, right? We saw him for like 3 games. He looked like a superstar, number 1 first round pick. For all of the other games, he didn't really.
Yeah. And so you got Josh Doxson, Quincy Enunwa. You've got some, reclamation projects and guys who have never been great, along with Crowder, who's a solid slot. So yeah, the offense has some major holes. You're looking at a team that's only drafted, I think it was 12 picks over the last 2 years for the Jets, only 4 of which went to the offensive side of the ball. So as I said earlier in the show, part of that was trading up for Sam Darnold in 2018. Great. But the following year, when you have number 3 overall, as much as we liked Quinnen Williams coming out, I think looking back at that, the importance of them needing to take that high pick and turning it into 2, 3, 4, 5 other picks, I thought is so crucial for this roster, because they're another team whose biggest holes are in the most important parts: pass game driven, receiver and corner, and edge defender.
Yeah,
that they haven't had forever. It's just the most important parts of the roster. They need to do whatever they can to make those spots better.
And at the very minimum, they need Quinnen Williams to be a dominant force. And we thought he would be coming out, and he hasn't been yet. So if Quinnen Williams takes a massive step forward year 2, that will be a significant help. But you're right. They went for the certainty of the quality player rather than the fact that they needed multiple spots to be filled. And so far, it hasn't paid off. So hopefully for everybody's sake, Quinnen Williams plays more like the player we thought he would be in year 2. They're in a decent spot in terms of value in the sort of spot they are picking in the first round, matching up with the positions they need. Again, I think they could go left tackle, grab one of the best there. I think they could also go with one of the best wide receivers, or potentially the best, depending on how far those guys do slide. They could do with a CeeDee Lamb or a Jerry Jeudy or any of those guys. I think they're in a good spot in terms of targeting those top players.
So they've brought in George Fant, Alex Lewis, Connor McGovern, Greg Van Roten, Josh Andrews, all on the offensive line. I wonder if they're still going to take a tackle that high, or if they say, look,
they should.
We're going to do all that in free agency. Now we have to go receiver. And if they grab a Jeudy or a Lamb there, I wouldn't hate that.
That group of 5 players has combined for 1 season of PFF grade north of 70.
Yeah, I understand. It's not great. The concept of attacking it through volume, I like, because if you get 2 or 3 good ones out of there, great. But the percentages are low given the guys that they brought in. That's the only issue. So yeah, I think they're in the market. They're tackle or receiver at 11. So the thing is, they could get one of the top tackles at 11, and it's still a pretty good receiver at 16, the 16th pick of the second round. Jalen Reagor might be there. They've got guys that could be there. So they still have and then 2/3. They have a shot, but all those day 1 and day 2 picks, wide receiver, the right tackle, corner, Maybe if the right edge falls, like just stick to high value positions because that's what they need across the board, the Jets.
Yeah, they're in that rough situation of needing a really good draft, right? There are teams that give themselves the flexibility so that all they're doing is attacking depth and a couple of lower value positions. And then there's teams like the Jets where they basically need to hit 3 consecutive picks to not have problems. And they're not the only team out there that's in that situation, but they are one of them.
Palazzolo for GM. We would have done it differently. # we would have done it differently. All right. Pittsburgh Steelers, Sam. They actually made some moves this offseason despite not having any money. Derek Watt was the one the fans loved. Brought him in to play fullback. The deep, dark Pittsburgh Steelers message boards just said, all we need is a running back and a fullback this offseason. Fullback. Got it. Eric Ebron comes in at tight end. They found some money for that, and they franchise tag Bud Dupree. And they make the great move to bring in Stefan Wisniewski, who we kept saying was a good value pick. That's a nice replacement for Ramon Foster at left guard.
Best value signing every year, Stefan Wisniewski. No matter who he goes to, he's usually better than the guy he's replacing, and always plays well for a fraction of the cost.
By the way, don't forget the Steelers already used their first-round pick on Minkah Fitzpatrick, so they don't pick until the 17th overall pick of round 2.
How much must it suck to be the moderately crappy Watt? You've got Hall of Fame talent, JJ. You've got Defensive Player of the Year talent, TJ. And then you got Derek, who's an okay fullback. Like, that's got to suck, right?
It still plays well. Still pays well, I think, to be the third best Watt.
Oh, I mean, it's better than our situation right here, recording this from our basement. I'm just saying that the family get together.
I'm in my attic.
Where it's like Hall of Famer, All Pro. Yeah.
That's Derek.
It's tough.
Well, he gets to play with his brother at least. 2 Watts.
True. That's nice.
On the same.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they don't pick until round 2. Minkah is their first round pick this year. Was that worth it?
Probably not. I think they're a team that's starting to have some cracks and need some holes. They're also a team that's in this spot of probably needing to address quarterback at some point, and they don't really have an easy path to doing that. Ben Roethlisberger is coming back looking like Tom Hanks from Castaway, apparently throwing without pain. Tom Hanks from Castaway or Matthew Patricia, depending on whether you're looking at photo or video evidence. Either way, like, his draft class is done at this point, right? Phillip Rivers is being cast away. We hope he has one more year. You've got it's Eli's retired. Ben Roethlisberger is the last man standing, and he's coming off a big injury. They showed last year the quarterback's already on the roster and not capable of replacing him, at least weren't a year ago. And they don't have the easy option to go and draft a first-round replacement this year. They're they need to figure out some kind of replacement for quarterback sooner rather than later. I don't see an obvious way of doing it.
Yeah, the other part where they're in a tough spot, too, is they only have 6 picks this year. So if they do use one of them on a quarterback to look to the future, first off, Ben hates that. Big Ben hates when they draft other quarterbacks. Yes. It's a waste of a pick on Big Ben's team. So I don't think they're going to do it. I think they're going to keep pushing this quarterback search down the road. They don't have the money. There's a lot of rumors that they're going to bring in Jameis Winston, which would be awesome. But there's a lot of rumors for that, but they don't have the money to bring him in. So they're in this weird win now mode, right? Like, the last year their defense was good. They could win games because of their defense. That's tough to bank on from year to year. But they don't have a ton of holes on the D. It's win now mode. I would love to see them take another receiver, though, too, and add even more depth behind Juju, James Washington, Deontay Johnson. More weapons there. Ebron. Try to air it out, win through the pass game. That's it. Steelers.
Yeah, I agree. I think the receiving core is actually in a much better spot than it was a year ago if they get a quarterback back. You know, if Roethlisberger comes back and he's good again, that propels Deontay Johnson skyward. It makes Juju look a lot better. James Washington potentially gets resuscitated, but Washington's spot in particular is the one that's vulnerable to an upgrade, especially in this draft. You can go targeting one of those guys and dramatically propel them in the right direction. A guy that could slip into the second and does a lot of dynamic things, Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State. I think he would be an interesting guy on that team to potentially upgrade them.
And O-line depth, another place where, like, Jonah Jackson, our second best guard out of Ohio State, could be a good second-round pick and have the long-term option while Stefan is the Band-Aid for 1 year.
Right.
All right.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Tennessee Titans to wrap it up this offseason. Bring back Ryan Tannehill, franchise tag for Derrick Henry, Cameron Wake's retiring, Vic Beasley's in, Logan Ryan's hitting free agency. There's some turnover on the defensive side of the ball. They trade Jarrell Casey. My concern with the Titans right now is they've been this like really 9-70 type of roster because they were the team that didn't have a ton of holes up and down the board, but having to pay Ryan Tannehill, put money towards Derrick Henry, I think has loosened up some of that depth. So I think the Titans are another team. They drafted really well last year, probably have to draft really well this year as well.
Yeah, I think the most obvious spot is replacing Cameron Wake. I kind of like the Vic Beasley move, at least in terms of, rolling the dice on being able to coax the pass rushing that his athleticism says should be there. But I don't know that you can rely on that replacing Cameron Wake, who was still absurdly productive despite his age. I think you need to figure out a guy that's more likely to do that, and the draft is an obvious spot to do that. Again, the Titans are a team that's they have a spot for those lighter, faster, undersized edge rushers. So that would make a lot of sense. There's a ton of those guys in this draft that they could target and fill that role. And then I think they probably need to figure out replacing Jack Conklin. I know Dennis Kelly is scheduled to go in there and be the right tackle. He'll be a decent pass blocker, but he's not nearly the run blocker that Conklin was. And that was a big part of, Derrick Henry leading the league in rushing. So if you expect that to happen again, you probably need to figure out an alternative.
Yeah, and so tackle depth, I think a key. Cornerback was a spot where they were rolling 3 deep with Adoree Jackson, Malcolm Butler, and Logan Ryan, as I said. But Butler's been up and down, injured last year, so that became a hole a little bit down the stretch. They got some decent play out of random players, but they've done a good job of adding volume in the secondary the last couple of years. I think continuing to doing that. If they do get Jeffrey Simmons to really emerge in year 2, that would be a huge win as well. But I think the Titans just need some defensive talent, and as you said, some tackle depth on the offensive side, maybe tight end as well. Another team that could be in the tight end market with Delaney Walker gone.
Yes,
for the Titans. They have the 29th overall pick. I think I keep saying the late first is a great spot for cornerbacks, but we'll see where the NFL values them. I would not hate a cornerback pick there for the Titans at 29.
Logan Ryan is an interesting player to replace for them because he kind of played all over the place for them. Had like 200 snaps in the box, 200 snaps as a wide corner, played in the slot. He started to transition to become more of that sort of versatile middle of the field joker on defense. It's not as simple as sort of just drafting a corner to replace that. You need to think about, what type of versatile defensive back can replace that.
Oh, did you have somebody in mind? You're just saying that's a guy that's a tough replacement.
I was going to say that, in an ideal world, they might target a guy like Isaiah Simmons, but obviously he's going to be long gone by the time they pick. So you're sort of in this poor man's Isaiah Simmons world if you're trying to replace that. It's not, it's more complicated than basically just taking a cornerback is what I'm saying.
Yeah, they could get safety, some safety skills like Xavier McKinney from Alabama. They already have a lot of those types of players, but I liked the way McKinney covered. I think he's got some Logan Ryan-y skills to him, even though he's a safety and he's a little bit slower. But he moves really well and can cover the slot just a little bit. Ashton Davis from Cal. So if they went the safety route, those guys are versatile safeties that I think would fit, even though on paper they have a lot of safeties.
Yeah. I know there's people that want to project Trevon Diggs to safety as well. That sort of long, bigger, scheme-specific cornerback becomes a safety in a lot of schemes. It depends how the Titans project those guys, but maybe a guy like him can come in and give you what Diggs or what Logan Ryan does as more of a versatile, positionless player as opposed to replacing cornerback.
I like it. So there we go. Team needs. AFC will hit the NFC on Monday, going team by team throughout free agency right now. Be sure to get to PFF.com. The draft guide is out there for Edge and Elite users. Over 1,100 pages. The best draft guide we've ever put out there. It's really incredible. So go check it out. PFF.com. do some reading while you're hanging out, social distancing, hoping everybody stays safe out there, making good decisions. And yeah, Sam, we'll be back Monday, man.
Yep. We are out.
All right, guys. Thank you.